Why do fundraisers need to have a clear school strategy to fundraise successfully? In a nutshell, the fundraising that you're doing for your school has to serve your school strategy. It isn't a separate, standalone function within the school. It has to be embedded within the school so that people are bought into it and understand their role within fundraising. But also it has to feel that it's serving the school. It has to feel that it is cascading down from a shared vision of what your school wants to look like in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello, welcome to this week's episode where we're talking about another one of the frequently asked questions that I receive. And this one is, can we fundraise without a clear school strategy? I'm always slightly amazed how many times I get asked this. A lot of the times it's directors of development who are struggling with the symptoms of trying to fundraise without a clear school strategy. Some of them put it exactly in that way. Others will explain to me the problem and we can very quickly diagnose the issue as being they're trying to work in a bit of a vacuum of clear direction about what their school is strategically prioritising. And the troubles that they face, the symptoms that we see when you try to fundraise without a clear school strategy is things like fundraising projects switching and changing all the time. So kind of one term you're told to fundraise for one thing and then it sort of switches, and then there's a bit of a rumour that it might be something different the next term after, and it's sort of there's never really a sense of stability that you're fundraising from. Sometimes there might be a stable project, but the messaging sort of keeps shifting around you with regards to what the target might be, what the messaging needs to be going out, a sense that you might have an agreed set of messaging and then it shifts and changes and it kind of takes you by surprise. And that's because it's not flowing down from an agreed, shared kind of vision that the school has, or a strategy that it has, kind of cascading down from that vision. And then the other symptom that I often see, and this can be for multiple reasons, so it's not always because of a lack of strategy, but it's fundraisers being drawn off constantly, consistently into non-fundraising tasks, but then feeling bad about it, either themselves because they're diligent and they want to be fundraising, or sometimes being held to account for fundraising targets, kind of KPIs around amount raised, when actually they're being distracted by other projects that are being kind of forced in their direction because there isn't a clear sense of what the strategy is for the school and how fundraising fits into that. So if any of those sound familiar, keep listening. This is the episode for you. And I would say, first of all, just to preempt the answer to my question, the answer that I'm going to give you is yes, you can fundraise without a clear school strategy. But in fact, it's quite tricky. There are things you need to know about. There are different ways that you can approach it. So what we're going to be talking about in this episode is why it's important for fundraisers to have a clear strategy, a school strategy, the essential elements of that strategy which are really important for you to be able to fundraise, and then 3 options for how to go forward if you find yourselves in this situation. And I do just want to say at the beginning here, I do also want any heads or non-fundraising senior leaders or governors to continue listening, please, because this also will explain to you why your fundraiser may be finding life just that little bit harder because there isn't that clarity around a whole school strategy. Before we dive into the detail, I wanted to let you know about a free resource I've created to help you prepare your school for the coming economic impact of the invasion of Ukraine. It's a checklist of things you need to think about and take action on now, and it's designed to prompt strategic conversations around the issues that actually matter. You can download your free copy at www.consultjuliette.com fundraisers.co.uk/checklist. Okay, now let's continue with this week's episode. So I'm always slightly surprised by how frequently I have this question, or at least once we've diagnosed and gone into the details of a director of development's challenges and the way that they're feeling a bit stuck. Often it comes down to the fact that there isn't a clear school strategy that they are fundraising from. And I'm also quite intrigued to find that many of my referrals through to work with heads and governors to create a strategy are actually initiated by directors of development who find themselves in this position. So if you find yourself in this position and you're feeling a bit lost, don't feel alone. First of all, why is it important? Why do fundraisers need to have a clear school strategy to fundraise successfully? In a nutshell, the fundraising that you're doing for your school has to serve your school strategy. It isn't a separate, standalone function within the school. It has to be embedded within the school so that people are bought into it and understand their role within fundraising. But also it has to feel that it's serving the school. It has to feel that it is cascading down from a shared vision of what your school wants to look like in the next 3, 5, 10 years. A sense of the donors wanting to give to something that's really important to the school. So if you're presenting a fundraising project to a potential donor, they're not going to want to know that this is sort of something a bit peripheral that the head mentioned in passing and maybe the school would approve. They sort of want to know that this is a project that actually sits at the heart of the school's success over the next 10 years, over the next generation even. And the best way to do that is to be able to explain to potential donors how the school has a shared vision, how there are strategic priorities, and that the fundraising is serving one or two of those priorities, and that this fundraising project that you're presenting to the potential donor is the way in which they can help support the school in getting to achieving that vision that is set. It's also important because as fundraisers, we can't allow ourselves to be taken off constantly in different directions. So for different fundraising projects or for non-fundraising projects, fundraising takes time to build relationships with potential donors, especially major gifts fundraising. You have to build those relationships over time, and that becomes very difficult, virtually impossible to do if you're feeling like you're constantly on shifting, changing sands, that there isn't a strong platform, a foundation of a shared vision, a shared strategy that you are fundraising based on. So it's important for fundraisers to know that they're focusing their efforts on the things that are going to be really appreciated by the school, but it's critical for donors to know that they are being asked to contribute to something that's going to take the school forwards in the direction of delivering its vision. So just also to be really clear, what do we mean by a clear school strategy? Now, in some schools, that will be, a PDF document called a strategic plan that is distributed to the community, that explains in very clear and engaging and kind of passionate language its vision and its strategic priorities for the next 3 or 5 years. In other schools, it's a little bit more fuzzy than that. There may not be a specific document. That's fine, as long as there's a shared understanding. It's not ideal, but it's fine. What's absolutely essential is that fundraisers have a clear decision from leadership, so from heads, from governors, about which fundraising projects are the priority over the coming years. That might be a decision around whether to prioritise bursaries or buildings, or try to do a combination of the two in a combined campaign. It might be conversations around which buildings projects, which capital projects are the most engaging and the most important for the school that will engage donors. There needs to be clarity about which fundraising projects that you're going to be focusing on. That is the most essential element. That is, if it's missing, that's what really stands in the way of your fundraising team. Ideally, you also want to have from your school strategy a shared narrative, a shared engaging description of why this project is important. Now, fundraisers can help to develop that, absolutely. But ideally, at least the seed corn of that passion of why this project is important is flowing from the head and the governors who have set this project as being a strategically important project for the school. So fundraisers can help to flesh out the narrative, to collect testimonials, collect visuals, kind of create language in a case for support that's going to engage people. But ideally, there's a shared sense of why this project is a priority, as well as a sense that they have one or two projects which are the absolute priority for the coming years for the school. That's the bare essential that you need. It may or may not be in a PDF called a strategic plan. That also doesn't matter. But it's that clarity of decision making around the project which is absolutely critical. So what can you do if you find yourself in this situation? If you find yourself as a fundraiser or senior leader trying to fundraise for a school where there isn't that clarity of project, there isn't that shared strategy or vision? You have three options, and they're in the order that I think you should try them. So the first one is the best. If that doesn't work, move on to 2. If that doesn't work, move on to 3. Okay, so here are your 3 options. The first is to advocate within the school to develop a strategy. Now that can take time, and it may be that you don't have time for that strategy development project to be completed. But I normally find that the first thing that directors of development can do if they find themselves in this situation is have a conversation with the head and see whether there's any appetite for developing more clarity around the vision for the school, the strategic priorities that it's going to be focusing on in the next 3 to 5 years, and then the strategic projects that flow from those priorities, which will include 1 or 2 fundraising projects. If you find that there is an appetite, if there is a sense with the head, the senior leadership within the governors that this is a gap that's affecting more than just the fundraising and that it's useful to have that clarity, then give me a call, because that's where I can come in. And I do find that directors of development actually speaking to their heads to kind of persuade them that actually bringing a facilitator in can be really effective around strategy development projects. So that's number one. And believe me, this is not me trying to sell my services. It genuinely is best if you are fundraising from having a really clear, engaging, passionate strategy from which your school is operating. If you've tried that and it didn't work, that's fine. Let's move on to option 2. Option 2 is to be much more donor-led than you might normally be. Now, just to give a quick definition, donor-led fundraising is a very important fundamental concept within fundraising. It's very important that you are being led by your donors to some extent as you're fundraising. This involves there being a partnership with prospective donors, being in conversation with the school, facilitated by the Director of Development, in order to find a match, the perfect match between the donors' desire to give philanthropically to a project that suits that meets their values, that meets their vision for what they want to do with their philanthropic donation, and marries with a project that the school strategically has placed as being important. I was talking to Simon Lowell, the Director of Development at Marlborough College recently, and he was saying, I think he said that someone else had said this to him, so it wasn't his direct quote, but something that really caught my attention, which was the idea that directors of development should act as a donor's representative on campus. I think that's really important, actually. You need to be donor-led. Normally, when we're being donor-led in our fundraising, we are marrying up the school's strategy and the school's strategic priorities and fundraising priorities with donors' wishes and kind of their vision for how they want to use their philanthropic donations. What I'm suggesting here as option 2 is that you are donor-led, but a bit more than usual. You're putting a bit more emphasis on what the donors want. So this would involve having conversations with potential donors about what they would be interested in giving to within your school, and then going back and acting as a liaison back to the school to propose projects that you know donors have expressed an initial willingness to fund within the school. Going through the school to get sign-off, ensuring that there's kind of agreement that this is something that the school is interested in, and then being able to go back to the prospect to say, yes, there's interest, there's appetite for this potential project. Let's get a meeting together, a conversation together for you to come to talk to the head directly about what the next steps might be. Now, I want to give you a big warning, a big flashing warning here. This It is best practice to be doing donor-led fundraising, but if you're doing it in the absence of a school strategy, the big risk that you face is that you are too led by donors and that you end up with donors being a bit miffed, sometimes even more than a bit miffed, because actually their ideas are being rejected by the school. So the really important kind of step that you have to take to make sure this approach works in the absence of a school strategy is to make sure that you're updating the school really frequently as your conversations with donors progress. Because what you want to avoid at all cost is that the distance between what donors want to fund and what the school wants to have funded, you don't want that distance to grow too wide. You don't want donors to come in with very left field suggestions of things that could be funded. I've had sort of suggestions of, I'd love to give you all of my papers so that you can house them in perpetuity, but don't worry, because I'm going to give you a donation to go with them to house them. Most of the time, unless it's a very influential, interesting alum who you want to hold their papers, most of the time that's not really in the school's interest to be agreeing to that donation. If you allow that donor to get too far down the path before the school says, actually, I'm not sure this is quite strategically what we're looking for, then you can get into difficult waters with that potential donor. So the second option, if you have been unsuccessful in encouraging your school to develop a strategy, is to be more donor-led, but be careful as you do it, that you're constantly referring back to the school and what it wants, even if that is a little bit of a shifting sands because they're not having the clarity that you would wish for with regards to their strategically important priorities. So that's option 2. Option 3, which I suggest you use as a kind of a backup option if everything else falls through, is to fundraise with a very, very short timescale and to keep projects really, really small as you go. So this would involve mini, maximum 1-year projects where you go out from the school with an agreement from the school that maybe there's some playground equipment or, some more benches for the orchard or whatever it might be that they've come up with, or something that the heads of department have asked for a particular year, which can't be funded directly through the school's budgets. To keep the project small, keep the fundraising kind of horizon really short, and continually go back to donors to ask for little donations for those projects. Now, this is also not ideal because it doesn't allow you to develop deeper relationships with potential major donors and to project to them or to communicate to them an inspirational, longer term vision of what you're trying to achieve. It tends to mean you get smaller donations than you might do otherwise, and it's quite a lot of work because you're having to go back to people frequently for the next donation. So your overheads in terms of fundraising costs and budgets can be a little bit higher, bringing your return on investment down for fundraising. So it's not ideal, but it minimises the risk that you go out there with something big, so a big commitment to, increasing the number of bursaries to 10% of pupils or something like that, which would require a significant number of donors or significant scale of donations. And then you risk the fact that actually next year that might not be the priority because there's this sense of no consistent school strategy to back that decision up. There is a risk there that you are seen to be externally shifting from one project to another, one big project to another quickly. But if you keep the project small and short time scale, you sort of bypass that risk of getting embroiled in a big campaign or big external public commitment that you're then not able to keep as a fundraising team. So I hope that's helpful. I do find that this is one of the areas where actually when I'm working with directors of development, there is no really right or wrong answer to any of this. The way that you deal with the fact that you're trying to fundraise without a strategy is often quite unique to your own school community. So please do reach out and we can jump on a call and have a conversation if you're finding that these particular answers don't solve the problem that you're facing, but this is an area that you're struggling with, then please do reach out and let's have a chat. Hope that's helpful. I love hearing your feedback as always. Goodbye for this week and have a strategic week, and I'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically. both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.